Forget what the history books told you about how World War II was won. Every documentary gives you the same story: brave soldiers, superior tactics, industrial might. And they are not wrong. But they leave out one thing: a tiny invention, small enough to hold in one hand, so secret it could not be used over land for the first year of its deployment. An invention that changed the math of aerial warfare so completely that the men who built it compared its impact to the introduction of the machine gun itself. This is the story of the VT Fuze, the secret weapon that most people have never heard of, and the reason the skies over London, the Pacific Ocean, and the forests of the Ardennes looked nothing like what the enemy expected. To understand why this invention mattered, you have to understand the problem it solved. And the problem was this: shooting down an aircraft from the ground in World War II was almost impossible. Not difficult, almost impossible. Anti-aircraft crews in 1940 were fighting a losing battle before a single shell left the barrel. Their target was moving fast, flying high, and changing altitude and bearing on command to make prediction harder. The crew on the ground had to estimate speed, height, and direction simultaneously, calculate where the aircraft would be by the time their shell arrived, set a mechanical time fuse on the round before loading it, and hope that every one of those calculations was close enough to matter. In the best conditions, with a clear line of sight and a steady formation, it was still a game of chance. In the smoke and noise of a real raid, it was barely better than firing blind. Official records from September 1940 during the Blitz state that it took roughly 1,800 rounds to bring down a single German aircraft. Experts largely agree the true number was even higher. 250,000 rounds were fired by the anti-aircraft division covering the Thames estuary in a single month. And yet, aircraft kept coming. The problem was not the guns, it was not the crews, it was the fuse. A shell that exploded too early or too late was a shell that accomplished nothing. What anti-aircraft fire needed was a way to sense the target, to detonate at exactly the right moment without a crew on the ground having to guess. That idea had been explored before the war even started. British engineers looked at it, German engineers looked at it, both walked away. The technical challenge was considered insurmountable: to build a radar transmitter small enough to fit inside an artillery shell fuse, and rugged enough to survive being fired from a gun at 20,000 times the force of gravity. That was not engineering, that was science fiction. Vacuum tubes of the era were fragile instruments built for laboratories, not gun barrels. The idea was shelved. The British abandoned it. The Germans abandoned it. But the Americans did not. The United States National Defense Research Committee kept working, and what they eventually produced was one of the most carefully engineered objects of the entire war: the variable time fuse, the VT Fuze, a device so sophisticated and so dangerous in the wrong hands that it was classified top secret for years and restricted to use over the open ocean only, where any unexploded rounds would sink to the bottom and stay there. The engineering challenges were stacked one on top of another. Every solution created a new problem. The first was power. A radar transmitter needs electricity. Early designs used dry cell batteries, but those had two fatal flaws. Their charge faded in 2 to 3 months, making long-term storage impossible. And the risk of the battery accidentally connecting to the transmitter during handling or storage was too high. A single failure in an ammunition stockpile could be catastrophic. The solution the engineers landed on was as strange as it was brilliant: a wet cell battery where the electrolyte was stored separately inside a small glass vial, sealed and inactive until the moment it was needed. That moment came when the round left the barrel. As the shell spun through the rifling of the gun barrel, it accelerated to around 50,000 revolutions per minute. That spinning force drove 2 small levers outward inside the fuse mechanism, releasing a trigger, which allowed a small primer to drive a spiked plunger into the glass vial, shattering it. The electrolyte flooded the battery plates, power flowed, and the radar came alive. The battery itself was a marvel of compact engineering: thin zinc plates coated with carbon, separated by insulating rings, each disc punched with holes to allow the electrolyte to saturate every layer under the centrifugal force of the spinning round. Even if the glass vial cracked during rough handling, the liquid would not reach the plates without that spinning force driving it outward. It was a safety system built into the laws of physics. Once powered, the fuse generated a continuous radio wave through an antenna that served as both transmitter and receiver at the same time. When that wave struck an aircraft and bounced back, the return signal shifted in frequency. The closer the shell came to its target, the more that frequency shifted. The fuse measured the gap between the transmitted and returned signal, what engineers called the beat note. And as the shell closed on the target, the amplitude of that beat note grew. When it crossed a critical threshold, it triggered a thyratron, a high-speed electrical switch filled with low-pressure hydrogen gas, which completed a circuit to a capacitor and detonated the shell at the optimum distance to saturate the target with shrapnel. Not too early, not too late, right there, right then. Packaging all of that inside a fuse small enough to fit a standard artillery shell in the 1940s was a feat the British and Germans had examined and declined to pursue. The vacuum tubes alone had to be miniaturized beyond anything previously attempted, and then engineered to survive a launch force that turned every single gram of mass inside the fuse into the equivalent of 20 kilograms, bearing down on the surrounding structure. Every component had to be supported, every cavity filled. The engineers used microcrystalline wax to seal the electronics, protect against moisture, and brace everything against that violent moment of launch. What came out of that process was something that looked simple and was anything but. The results on the battlefield were not gradual, they were immediate, and they were shocking. That figure of 1,800 rounds to down a single aircraft dropped to somewhere between 85 and 100. A tenfold improvement in lethality in a single invention. A jump in effectiveness that experts compared not to a marginal upgrade, but to the introduction of automatic weapons. At peak production, over 250,000 of these fuses were being built every single week. The fuse was first fired in combat on January 4th, 1943, aboard the USS Helena, defending against an aerial attack in the Pacific. It worked. Japan was already losing pilots faster than it could replace them. The VT Fuze accelerated that process, and within a year, Japan launched the kamikaze campaign, sending waves of untrained pilots on one-way missions, believing that sheer numbers might overwhelm American defenses. In May 1945, 2 American destroyers off Okinawa were targeted by 150 kamikaze aircraft. Every single one was shot down. Not most of them, all of them. That was the VT Fuze. It was eventually cleared for use over land for the first time in conjunction with the Allied invasion of Normandy. The timing was almost too precise. Within a week, Germany began launching V1 buzz bombs at Britain. At the peak of that campaign, 100 V1 buzz bombs were being launched each day. With the VT Fuze arming anti-aircraft batteries across southern England, 80% of them were destroyed before reaching their targets. Then came the Ardennes. December 1944, Germany's last great counteroffensive. Bitter cold, dense forest, and artillery fire that would normally have been absorbed by the tree canopy, detonating harmlessly in the branches overhead. With the VT Fuze, shells exploded at the perfect height above the forest floor, showering German formations with shrapnel through the canopy they thought was protecting them. It was the fuse that helped break that final push. And still, even then, the weapon was so sensitive that artillery officers during the Battle of the Bulge spent hours searching through snow to account for every single unexploded round that had misfired. Not because they needed the parts, because they could not allow a single example to fall into German hands. The atomic bomb ended the war with a punctuation mark the world has never forgotten. But if you look at the statistics, the mathematics of what changed the course of fighting, from the Pacific to North Africa to the forests of Europe, the VT Fuze has an argument that no other single invention can match. It did not win battles through spectacle, it won them through precision. Through a red glass vial, a spinning battery, and a radio wave that knew exactly when it had found its target. Most people have never heard of it, That's exactly how the men who built it intended it. A weapon designed to be invisible, kept secret for years, manufactured in pieces across dozens of facilities so that no single worker could deduce what they were building. World War II was not decided only on the front lines. It was decided in laboratories, in engineering workshops, and in the minds of men who looked at a problem everyone else had given up on and refused to walk away. That is the war that history keeps forgetting to tell you about. And that is the war worth understanding. If you want to keep uncovering the weapons, inventions, and decisions that actually shaped the Second World War, subscribe and stay locked in. The next story is already coming.